In this video, we're going to see how the Pirates of the Caribbean attraction in Tokyo Disneyland compares to the one at Disneyland as well as Walt Disney World. This is Parallel Disney, the place to see the various anomalies between the Disney dimensions. As we look at the ride building at Tokyo Disneyland, we find that there is no train tracks that bisect the buildings like they did in Disneyland and Disney World. Something that I find pretty extraordinary is how the front section is very much like that of Disneyland, however the back is more aligned to that of Disney World. The entrance facade is rather similar to that of Disneyland's. Notable differences include the number of crossbars in this top window. On the second floor at Disneyland there's a door. At Tokyo it's just another window. The lantern is also now suspended from the ceiling instead of a part of it, and the entrance sign is very different as well. At Disneyland, the queue starts outside and has you winding through various chains and ascending ramps before entering the main building. However, at Tokyo, you'll be entering the building right away as they have their own queuing area inside off to the left. Pirates are not painted on the wall, but this time you can find framed artwork depicting pirates in their daily lives. Like at Disneyland, there's an introductory centerpiece, but it's quite different. We now find a seagull instead of a parrot. The flag now has crossed bones instead of sabers. There's also no longer the map with Jack's compass. The bricks used to create the archway only requires one layer of bricks, while at Disneyland it takes two. The guardrail around the canal at Tokyo stays the same height and is consistent throughout. At Disneyland, however, it actually changes and it steps up as people rise with the ramp. The lamps are also a little different and a bit larger. The boats going around the canal no longer have people in them. The map is actually now on the side of the wall. It's kind of nice because you can get a really good look at it. In the queue area, there are no longer square numbers. Also, there's no longer the bronze dividers or number. The queue gates are also bars instead of solid planks of wood. In the last video, I didn't really mention much about the boat, so here's a closer look now. Tokyo's boat, as well as Disneyland, appears to have a chock on the nose for a rope to hold onto. All the boats have metal bar handholds for the front seat. However, Tokyo's is the only one that has a cushion around it. At Tokyo, you find many of these bars extended beyond the seats for the passengers behind to hold onto. Disney World has cutouts for fingers, and at Disneyland it just has a little bevel for a handhold. All the boats have a similar solid bumper. The area above the bumper at Disneyland has a wooden texture, and at Disney World it just seems to be solid plastic, but it has a few grooves cut into it. At Tokyo, there really isn't anything extending past the bumper. The boats in Tokyo have a variety of colors, while at Disney World and Disneyland, there's only one. When first casting off at Tokyo, finding the differences between Disneyland is pretty tricky. At this point, the quickest giveaway is probably the fireflies. At Tokyo, they're a lot more static and appear to be operated with a type of dimmer, as you can see them gradually increase or decrease in brightness. At Disneyland, however, they're a lot more bouncy, and that's required because half the bulb is darkened, so when it bounces around and changes its direction, you no longer see it. In Tokyo, this building, which might be a boat, maybe it's a dock, I don't know, it has extra equipment hanging from the outside wall. The sticks supporting the shutters are in different positions. Also, the flower bed needs a little love. There no longer is an alligator present between the shack and this boat. I don't think I ever noticed that alligator before. This boat is now hitched to the shack, while in Disneyland it's hitched to a tree. The shutter on the side is now closed, and there's no longer a lantern that is glowing. There's also a net draped over the bow. These things are different too. I think they might be buoys, but I'm not sure. Tokyo also has a Blue Bayou restaurant. Though you're kind of far away, you could actually make out a few differences from the boats. Tokyo's is overgrown with vines. There's also this brick extension on the side, and this sort of gazebo goes all the way to the water now. Continuing down the stream, there's no longer this interesting crooked tree that you go under. As we get to the shanty on the stilts, we see that there are some more of these things hanging on the side. There's no longer a boat in the water, but there seems to be a few traps placed. The lantern is now suspended from a post instead of the shanty. There's also some equipment on the roof as well. There is a pot of flowers on the dock now. There now seems to be some kind of net draped over the rail. The drapes in the window are now closed. The support beams no longer seem as well made. As we start going through the brick archways, we find a shack that is inside the wall on the left side. At Tokyo, there are 2 windows and they're much larger, but they're no longer backlit, and there's a lot fewer props on the outside. The arches on the side have a deeper impression. Farther down, there is another shack at Tokyo, but not at Disneyland. Before getting to the skull at the end, at Tokyo you go beneath 4 arches, while at Disneyland you will go beneath 6. In the final chamber with the skull, at Tokyo there's a lot of space above it and even a tree. In Disneyland you're just in a closed off room with a shallow ceiling. At Tokyo, the skull now has the sabers pointing downward and they're directly behind the head instead of under. The poles holding the curtain are now at a steeper angle, and that curtain doesn't tuck in. The skull also has fewer teeth and seems to be wearing Jack's bandana. Side note, have any of you ever noticed that the end of these poles are capped off with little skulls? There's only one drop at Tokyo, and when you make it to the bottom, you get to see a new scene. There are a couple of chests, and one of them is Davy Jones' heart box, and you can even hear it beating. The omen in the clouds outside the cave is also present, but this time it's no longer obstructed by a waterfall. The way that is colored also makes it look like it is now sunrise or sunset. In this chamber with the 3 skeletons, we no longer find a waterfall. Also, there are 2 chests now, and both of them are locked instead of the one that's been open in Disneyland. This pirate is no longer touching the flag at all. The skeleton face down with the sword in his back now has a hook hand. The seagull on the pinned pirate's hat is now facing a different direction. The sword in the pirate's hand is now facing downward. As we approach the next show scene, we can see a few waterfalls that are lit from below. These are not present at Disneyland or Disney World. With the helmsman scene, the background storm effects seem nearly identical to the one at Disneyland, but it no longer has the strobe light. The skeleton is also a lot more active on the helm. The actual wreck itself seems to have more in common with Disney World, but this time the mast is leaning the other direction. The tavern scene at Tokyo now takes place on the left side. The Jolly Roger flag is now hanging in the background by the bar. The patrons that were at the table are no longer there, but hey, we found that missing chessboard. The gentleman on the bar no longer has a bushy beard. So this is a little tricky to explain, but I'm going to give it my best shot, and I find this pretty interesting. These arrows represent the flow of the attraction, or the direction the boat is heading. Relative to the flow, the position of the bar and the table are the same. The table comes first, then the bar. However, relative to the point of reference, they're flipped. When it comes to this table with the mast through it, as well as this crow's nest, it's the opposite. Relative to the frame of reference, they're in the same position. However, relative to the flow, they're an opposite. I think that made sense. Let me know how I botched it in the comments. Unfortunately, the Captain Quarters scene that was found at Disneyland is no longer present. Therefore, the next scene at Tokyo is the one of the skeletons sitting on the heap of treasure. The major difference you'll notice here is how much more massive the Disneyland version is. The skeleton at Disneyland is also better dressed, and he has a larger handful of treasure. Not to mention his just generally stacks up higher. Both rooms feature the chest with the Aztec gold treasure. However, Tokyo has a little pyramid stack of the coins. An added effect to this scene at Tokyo is that the handful of treasure has a sparkle added to it. Tokyo still currently has the projected fog effect of Davy Jones, which has since been removed from both Disneyland and Walt Disney World. As we find ourselves in the battle scene, we see that the fort is a bit more like Disney World as we don't see any soldiers. As we get to the Wicked Wench, we find that it's a bit of a hybrid between the Disneyland and Disney World version, but it has its own unique flares as well. Where Disneyland and Disney World had a hole in the rear sail, as well as a lantern hanging just outside the captain's cabin, Tokyo has neither of these. Like Disneyland though, Tokyo has this decorative flourish. The area beneath the captain's cabin now matches the decorative paintwork, and is no longer a scale pattern like at Disneyland and Disney World. There is now a barrel and box on top of this rigging shelf, and speaking of the rigging, there's overall seems to be less. There are portholes like at Disneyland, but the rims are thinner and there's not a line coming out of the first one. The brackets on the rigging shelves only go halfway down like at Disney World. Barbossa is dressed like the one at Disneyland, and the paint scheme matches that of Disney World's. There's a dinghy on the port side like there was at Disneyland, but this time it has a sail, But it doesn't seem like any pirates were able to breach the fortress as there's no fighting going on. The fortress overall shares more in common with Disney World than it does Disneyland. As we enter the town, we can see that the structures are more in line with the ones at Disney World rather than Disneyland. In this scene, we find that this top window is now closed. The plants that are beneath the woman that comes out of the shutters have less flowers. There are also now these vines that are overgrowing the structures. Surprisingly, even though the scene seems to be much more like Disney World, the interrogating pirate is actually more like the one at Disneyland. Their blades are more curved, they're both wearing a hat even though they're a bit different, but they both have feathers in them, and they're not wearing a sash. As we get to where Jack Sparrow is located, we can see once again that this is very much like the one at Disney World. Some differences of note in this area is the La Costurera sign, how it has a different font as well as decoration. The light fixture hanging from above is also different. And the window on the door is backlit at Tokyo, while the door at Disney World is ajar. The entrance is mostly blocked off at Tokyo, while at Disney World you got a clear path. As for Jack Sparrow, at Tokyo his compass hangs further below the belt. His sash doesn't go all the way to the ground. Also at Tokyo, his tunic is more opened up as it's closed off below the waist in Disney World. As we approach our next scene, we now find what is probably the most notable difference between the various Pirates of the Caribbean attractions. At Tokyo, it retains the original auction for buying a bride instead of the one for buying some of the town's wealth. The auction sign is at a different location. This grouping of people are now all women and they're tied up. This pirate is now holding onto that rope instead of a gun. The lady next to the auctioneer is no longer holding a couple of chickens. The redheaded lady is no longer a pirate and is part of the auction. And once again we can see all that overgrowth. Oh, and about that cantina sign. It is on the other side of the river where the East India Trading Company sign is at Disneyland and Disney World. There is also a Buy a Bride banner that is hanging over the balcony. Due to this being a different type of auction, and the redhead is no longer a pirate, the dialogue is completely different. As we get to the next scene, we see that pirates are doing all of the chasing this time, except for the last one. Something interesting about this scene is how Tokyo has the chase that was missing from Disneyland, as well as the chase that was missing from Disney World, giving them a total of 5 chases, instead of 4 like the other parks. Here's a good spot to see more of the hybrid nature of this attraction. Like at Disneyland, the lantern is on a post, but this time there's not a chicken on it, and the dog is on the right side. But like at Disney World, the map is displayed on an object, this time it's a barrel instead of a box, and the fountain is now in the middle of the stairs instead of the pirates drinking the rum. A unique addition to Tokyo is all the potted plants that are on the steps. The final chase is more in line with Disney World as the lady has a broom as a weapon instead of a rolling pin. Tokyo also has a nice chandelier while the other ones just have a simple lantern. The scene with the pirate and the 2 cats is more like the one in Disney World. They both have a ramp that is coming out of the water. The wall there next to is stubbier and the door is closer to the cats. Because of that stubbier wall, there's this nook area with some plants, although the taller plant at Tokyo has bigger leaves. However, the pirate's leg is more extended out like the one in Disneyland. Unique to Tokyo is how the lantern is set atop of a box, while at Disney World it's on a barrel, and at Disneyland it's on 2 barrels. As we enter the next scene, we can find more similarities with Disney World and Disneyland, and a few unique features for Tokyo. Like Disney World, there's no archways beneath them, and there's no trough for the donkey to eat from. The dog also seems to be a bit more similar to the one at Disney World. Like at Disneyland though, the archway over the donkey is brick. The man on the right has a skull on his hat. Also, the man on the left is no longer wearing anything on his head. Unique to Tokyo is the window and blinds that are behind the band. The lute, or maybe mandolin, has F-holes now. And surprisingly, Tokyo actually seems to have the least amount of overgrowth in this scene. The man in the boat no longer has a zigzag pattern at all, and this time he has some piece of cloth that is covering the chest that he is holding. There is something hanging over the balcony like at Disneyland, but this time it seems to be a rug instead of a dress. There's also now a lantern in this pile of junk. Unique to Disneyland that I missed in the last video is this lower window. In the pigsty, the pirate's hat seems to be a lot taller than all the others. Like at Disney World, there's a chain on the wall and the lantern is on a barrel. The pirate on top of the bridge shares his look a bit more with the one that's at Disneyland. He has the hat that has the skull that is in front of the crossbones, and it has the fuzz on the top. And his sash isn't super long. But like at Disney World, he's positioned on the left side of the bridge instead of the right, and the parrot is facing more forward instead of at an angle. Like at Disneyland, Tokyo has 3 cells instead of 2, but this time there's not a skeleton in that first cell. There's also a lot less debris on the outside of the cells. The gap between the first 2 cells seems to be larger at Tokyo. Inside the second cell, it's a bit more like Disney World as there's a bunch of debris that's crashed in. However, the cell itself is a bit more like the one at Disneyland because it has a door on it. Here we can see that at Disney World, there's actually a makeshift table with a cloth on top of a box that's not at the other parks. The lamps hanging from the ceiling are different at all 3 parks. Tokyo has a square, Disney World's is circular, and Disneyland appears to be a hexagon. Unique to Tokyo is how the dog has a plate on the step in front of him. And the windows has horizontal bars, while Disneyland and Disney World both have crossbars. The dog at Tokyo is the bestest little good boy you ever did see. Look at that tail go. Unfortunately, Tokyo is missing the collapsing room segment that's found in Disneyland. However, luckily there is still the armory scene. On the right side, we can see that there are cannonballs now scattered all over the place. The roof is also in good condition, unlike at Disneyland, which we've seen was falling apart. Tokyo also has a lot less room, leaving Disneyland a lot more options for set dressing. On the left side, the pirate that is on the cannon is no longer alone. I guess the rum must have ran out in Tokyo. The cannon now has a barrel plug hanging beneath it. Tokyo only has 2 barrels of explosive hanging above you instead of 3. At Tokyo, you'll actually have the opportunity to go inside the treasure room instead of it just being off to the side like at Disneyland and World. You will also find Jack on the right side now instead of the left. Like at Disney World, the hat is on the chair, but this time it's perched on the right side. There's also the parrot that is perched on the chest. Like at Disney World, you disembark the boats at a different location than where you started your journey. The moving walkway at Tokyo has the tracks of a peg-legged pirate. These tracks used to be at Disney World as well, but it seems like the tread's been replaced and they're no longer there. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please consider giving me a thumbs up. Oh, and if you think this channel has a lot of potential in the future, please consider subscribing. If there's an attraction that you want to see a Parallel Disney on, let me know in the comments. As of right now, I'm planning on doing It's a Small World for the next big Parallel Disney video. Until next time.